Alrighty, I'm just going to assume that everyone can see my slides. So my name is Davey Shafik. I am a staff engineer at a startup called Blackheart. We do try before you buy e-commerce, super cool stuff. I have been part of the open source community for 20 plus years, primarily participating on the PHP side. I've written books, and I was the release manager for PHP 7.1. And you can find me as at dshafik on Twitter to get in touch, reach out to me. But yeah, so I've been an open source advocate, you could say, for many years. And in my role as a developer advocate and beyond, I've spent a lot of time working with open source tools and helping companies work with open source. So I think, based on the title of this talk, most of you are kind of expecting this to be maybe quite a deep talk. But what I'm actually going to start by talking about is something that I think most people are familiar with, and that is lines of code. So I want you to think about, the largest project that you have worked on. I've heard, way back when that like Facebook has like 3 million plus lines of code just for, Facebook.com. And the largest project that I was personally involved in, like that I was employed to work on, was about 330,000 lines of code. So like, think about your project. Like, is it 100,000 lines of code, 200,000 lines of code? Is it a million? Do you have more than Facebook does, right? So, let's think about what that means for your project and how much effort goes into building and maintaining that. And then let's look into some other statistics around lines of code. So if you are a Python developer using Django, it has over 300,000 lines of code. So like already just the Django framework is larger than my largest project. Maybe you use Flask, that's, 15,000-ish lines of code. Or something minimal like Falcon, which also about 15,000 lines of code. But the reality is that like that's sort of Python code written in Python. But there's obviously a runtime that executes that. So you've got CPython, one of the runtimes, which is almost 1.5 million lines of code. And again, we don't run that in isolation. So typically, even if you're using WSGI and stuff like that, you're running it behind a reverse proxy. That might be Nginx or perhaps Apache. So you've got another 150,000 lines of code, or 500,000 in case of Apache. And even still, we probably run a database server. So maybe that's MySQL with its 3.5 million lines of code, or MariaDB or one of the variants, or it's Postgres, which is a svelte comparatively 1.2 million lines of code. Maybe you're web scale and you use MongoDB, which is 3.2 million lines of code. And of course, we like to cache our database and stuff. So bring in Memcache. It's just a tiny 222,000 lines there. It's actually a really clean little code base. But of course, we can keep digging this rabbit hole. We can keep going further down. And so you're running all of that stuff on an operating system, and it's probably Linux. Might be a BSD. Love me some BSD. Less likely to be Windows, but who knows? But the Linux kernel alone is about 17.8 million lines of code, which is an absolutely huge, staggering number. So what that means is that your Python app, which is sitting on top of Linux, is made possible because of over 20 million lines of code. And that comes from thousands of contributors. So I think we have to understand and be aware that there are thousands of people giving up their time and their energy to make this 20 million lines of code possible. And it's not just that, right? So the Linux, GNU Linux, whatever you want to call it, is not just the kernel, right? So I spent some time gathering some stats on just a basic Ubuntu server install. And when you do that, you're looking at about 70 million lines. And you add that to your application and the platform, and now you're looking at 72, 73 million lines of code just to run your application. And these numbers are staggering. Like, I don't think any one of us can really think about maintaining or writing that many lines of code in our entire career. Never mind, as an ongoing project. So I think that, all of those contributors, we owe all of these people. A few of you might be contributors that are watching this right now. We owe all of you a huge debt of gratitude. And we are, without doubt, standing not on the shoulders of giants, but really at the top of a very large human pyramid. Never before in our history have we had such a readily available body of work upon which to build. It would be as if the actual pyramids came pre-built, hanging from a crane, and all we had to do is pick the spot to place them and lower them down. And what do we use this for? Apps like Yo. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It was an app that was released way back when, and it had one button that when you clicked it, it said Yo. And it was kind of useless, although it did get turned into a really good early warning system for Israel, which was pretty cool. But like, we use it for things like NFTs or Instagram for our gerbils, which, let's face it, is kind of one of the best uses of Instagram. And Uber for choosing what to eat for lunch. These things which are fun or improve our lives in small measurable ways, they're kind of wasting this amazing gift that we've been given. We are just so privileged to be able to build something out of nothing, because obviously computer code is not a physical, tangible thing. And we can build it on top of this amazing body of other people's hard work. And I think that we owe it to ourselves and to society to use it for something meaningful. So E.F. Schumacher wrote, "The poor can be helped to help themselves, but only by making available to them a technology that recognizes the economic boundaries and limitations of poverty." What this means is that when looking at third world issues, we have to attack them using readily available local technology, otherwise they're going to fail. So to help a farmer, we could drop a gasoline-powered tractor in the middle of their field, and assuming that they could figure out how to drive it, it would be useful for about as long as the gasoline in the tank lasts. On the other hand, if you give them an ox or a couple of oxes and a plow, this is a technology that is sustainable and maintainable for the locale and for the resources at hand. So next I want to talk about the world's most popular cell phone. Now, you probably would be forgiven for thinking that, it has a logo that looks like this, or, maybe a logo that looks like this. I think they've updated this, but it's still there somewhere. But actually, it has this logo on it, which some of you may never have really seen, or you have to kind of reach back in your memory. I know I have to. But this is a Nokia. And this phone doesn't have a 4-inch touchscreen or a 7-inch touchscreen. In fact, it only has a 4-line screen, and it is the Nokia 1100. This is the most popular cell phone of all time ever. And it's popular because it has a battery life that lasts for weeks, not days. It's cheap, and it's as tough as, a Nokia. It also includes a flashlight, making it indispensable in areas with poor electricity availability. It's dust proof. It's an incredible device for a particular kind of customer. And they've sold 500 million of these things. Like, these are numbers that are incredible for a single model of a cell phone, particularly. Now, some time back, there was a lot of noise because Microsoft, who at that time was in partnership with Nokia, was going to be releasing a $27 phone. And that was the Microsoft Nokia 130. And basically, this is the first phone since the Nokia 1100 was released back in 2003 that really had a shot at replacing it. And it's barely a feature phone. It has an FM radio. It has video playback support, and it still has a flashlight. But it doesn't have a web browser, and it can't even do MMS. So this is a picture of every device on the internet. And you can see there are some very, very dark spots here. Particularly Africa is worth calling out. It is our largest continent. Only 13.5%, or 150 million people in Africa, had access to the internet at the time that this was taken, which accounts for about 6% of all internet users. It's a very small amount. When you compare this to an average of populated countries, to developed countries, they typically have about 73% of their population is online. However, 82% of the African population has a cell phone. That's 910 million Africans with cell phones. This means that if you want to solve problems in places like Africa that have many third world countries in it, you're going to solve those problems not with web pages, but you might be able to do it with text messages. So this brings sort of an entirely different usability and bandwidth problems, but it's really interesting, and I think it's worth exploring what we can do with that. And it's a great example of using locally available resources and readily available resources to solve problems. So what can I do? So every 15 minutes, an elephant is killed by poachers. It's estimated that they'll be extinct in about 11 years. Now, imagine an app that allowed people to text the location of elephant poachers to authorities in real time and to allow them to respond. Every month, 70,000 people die from water-related diseases. That's 840,000 people a year. What if you could blast out a text warning to villagers about contaminants getting into their water supplies to help them avoid bad water? And every year, 1.5 million children die from vaccine-preventable diseases. And in this case, it's not about the actual number of vaccines available. It's about getting it to the people in question and raising awareness. So, what about an app that texts mothers when vaccines are available for their children within walking distance? These are the kinds of things that can really change the world. So, I will fully admit that I don't know all the problems, never mind the solutions. Part of our job is to ask questions, to make the tools and the learning resources available, and to help people to help themselves. I think that it's really important that as engineers, when we look at the problems that we face, we don't just attack them with the tools that we know that are available to us because we live in, first world countries with fast internet and have high powered laptops, but that we also think about how we can extend those solutions down to or across to people that don't have the same access to tools and resources that we do. And it can lead to some really unique and interesting solutions that probably scale up better than our problems scaled down, or our current solutions scale down. So I'm hoping that a lot of you were sitting there thinking to yourself, I could totally do that. As I was describing those three simple problems, not simple problems, but very big problems, but with simple solutions, I hope that you were thinking, yeah, that totally sounds like something I could do. Well, I want to ask you, what's stopping you? What's the barrier that stops you from going out and solving problems like this? And I also want to encourage you to think about this when it comes to contributing to open source. So open source is a community. It is a commons, a body of work that we have the privilege to be able to utilize and use. Many of us use it for profit. Maybe not exclusively. I know there are certainly things that I do that are not for profit using open source. Examples of that are Prompt, which is the mental health initiative that PJ and I co-founded with some other people to help raise awareness of mental health and technology. We use open source tools to build that website and to spread that message. So yeah, I really just want to kind of get you thinking about what the possibilities are. How do we solve real problems, things like climate change and social injustice, prosperity disparity, real problems that affect real people today in every country, not just in the third world. How can we go about solving those problems? And so I want to challenge you to just get out there and change the world. I think that it's possible. And I think that we have, as individuals and as a collective, a better starting point for that than any other period in human history. So that's really all I have today. I know I'm running a little short, but thank you so much.